we are here for the final presentation of Saskia Hesselink. My name is Esther Gramsberger. I am the external examiner today. That means that I have to look after the correct execution of the exam. I will explain you what the procedure is. First, Saskia has 30 minutes to explain to you her graduation project. Afterwards, her teachers will have 50 minutes to ask questions. And afterwards, we will ask you to leave the room and we will discuss conclusions of the exam. And after that 50 minutes, we will call you in and then we continue the ceremony. First of all, I'd like to introduce to you tutors. Here, Lidwien Schoormans, main mentor architecture. In the middle, Guido Quist, mentor building technology. And in the dark, shirt, Pieter Graaf, second mentor architecture, who has been involved especially in the tutoring of the research part of the discipline. So Saskia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to talk today about my design, which I've called Collective Reuse, a reinterpretation of the Portique dwelling. And so I'm going to start out with talking about the research part, and then that research led to certain design principles. So I'll talk about these design principles. And then I'll finish up talking about the design itself and the relevance of that design in a broader sense. This is part of the graduation studio Transforming Housing Heritage in Rotterdam Carnisse, which is in Rotterdam South. And basically it's a small neighborhood in the southern part of Rotterdam, which was built shortly after the Second World War. And it consists of all these three different dwelling types, which are also actually part of the same dwelling typology, but they're three different, designed by three different architects. So they're all portique dwellings with 3 floors, and so the size of the dwellings and also the setup is quite similar for all 3 of the designs, but the facade is actually the main way that the 3 designs are different. So when I was first walking around in the Vogelbuurt, which is what the neighborhood is called, I think you notice a lot of degeneration in the neighborhood, but it's pretty localized. So basically, the structure of the buildings is still sound, but you've got a lot of maintenance issues for the buildings. And so I was wondering, what is the reason for that? Why is there this huge discrepancy in the maintenance of the buildings? And it's not just per one apartment, but it's usually a group of apartments. So I started to look into the Vereniging van Eigenaars, which is the homeowners association. And looking into that, I was wondering if there was a better way to do it, if it was a better setup for a homeowners association rather than the Vereniging van Eigenaars, which is that each owner of the apartment owns their apartment and then has a share in this Vereniging van Eigenaars. But if you look at a housing cooperative, it's exactly the opposite. So instead of the homeowner owning the apartment itself, the homeowner has a share in the housing cooperative, and the housing cooperative owns the whole building. So this also led me to look at all sorts of other different types of collective housing to see whether there was a better option for the neighborhood. And when you look at the portique flats, there were 700,000 portique flat dwellings built between 1945 and 1975, and that amounts to almost 10% of the total building stock in the Netherlands. In Rotterdam, that's even more so because this dwelling type is concentrated in the larger cities, and in Carnissa it's even 73%. So recently the government has designated certain housing types to be a vulnerable housing. And it's vulnerable as far as maintenance is concerned, but also that it attracts people who are living there who maybe aren't going to take as good care of their homes as others. And that's apartment housing, which with a floor area of smaller than 75 square meters, no lift, and a book value of under 130,000 euros. And if you see this compared to this map of the portique dwellings, you can see that a lot of the areas with the most portique dwellings are also the areas with these vulnerable housing stock. So what I wanted to do was look at the portique as a unit, rather than as an apartment or as a whole block of different portiques, but the unit of the portique itself. And so the unit is actually, it's in between the single-family dwelling and a high-rise block of flats. So it's too big for a single family, so the question is what would fit into this dwelling type? And a collective housing situation would fit really perfectly in this type of dwelling. And while it may not seem an obvious choice, especially for this neighborhood, the Ministerie of Home has done research recently, and they talk about clustering of people with shared interests being a major growing housing trend in the past few years. So I think that that with some modifications, then it could work really well. So this led to my research question, which is how can the post-war portique flat dwelling be reinterpreted to accommodate collective living to advance the regeneration of the post-war neighborhood? And I've split my research into three main topics, which was the portique dwelling itself, collective housing, and the different target groups which could be put into those collective housing. So I think one of the main things about the portique dwelling is this this idea of the Dutch architects at the time to try to maximize the efficiency of the dwelling. These are really early Reconstruction period dwellings after the Second World War, and they really needed, there was material shortage and also housing shortage, so they needed to be able to build these houses as quickly as possible with as few materials as possible. And so, what an important factor in the portique dwelling is this facade with a strong vertical element, which is the central access stairwell, and then to either side you've got a strong horizontal element, which are the living areas. Also, because they were searching for maximum efficiency, you've got this really narrow spaces separated by load-bearing walls. And one of the characteristics of this dwelling type is the kink in the load-bearing structure, which can form limitations with regards to the flexibility with transformation. Another characteristic of these dwellings is a sort of a single brick facade without any insulation. So this means that there's really not much separating you from inside and outside. So when I was looking into collective housing, I think one of the main things that struck me was that you really need to have a reason to go into this type of housing situation, because most people are more interested in just living on their own. So what is the added value of collective housing? And I identified three added values, which are more or less important for the different target groups. So the first one is financial. It's obviously cheaper to live with other people. You've also got a social added value, so that people can have a support network, people with similar interests nearby. And also the physical added value of having, being able to have more amenities or bigger spaces. And when I was looking into sort of the most important lessons from the collective housing, I think a main thing was group size. So the research showed that the ideal group size was between 4 and 8 people, because any larger than that, you would have, you don't get the intimacy that you need, and any smaller, and you have you can have difficulties in resolving conflicts. And another important consideration was the separation of public and private, so that there's really a strong separation between those things and a stacking of functions. So you have the more collective spaces on the ground floor and the more private areas on the upper floors. And when most people think of collective housing, they think of sort of idealistic, highly educated people, which is not the demographics of this neighborhood. So I wasn't looking to gentrify the neighborhood. What I really wanted to do was to design something to help the people in the neighborhood itself. So I wanted to look to find target groups within the neighborhood who had a strong added value from collective housing. And I identified then 3 target groups, so migrant workers, senior citizens, and single parents. And the Netherlands has a huge influx of migrant workers, and most of these, and they live in notoriously squalid conditions in campings, or even in the neighborhood itself, there's 8 to 10 people living in one 55 square meter apartment. So there are a lot of advocacy groups trying to figure out how to house these people cheaply and efficiently. And the city of Rotterdam itself is looking to realize 2,000 housing units for migrant workers in 2014. And they don't want it all clustered into one place. They don't want a ghetto. They want it kind of spread out around the city. Senior citizens, the population of the Netherlands is aging, but these people are not necessarily wanting to move into nursing homes. And when we were walking around in the neighborhood, we found that a lot of the elderly people who were living there, they said, I don't want to move. I like where I am, but I can't. At some point, I'm not going to be able to walk the stairs anymore. So that was So I thought that was an important target group. The third target group is maybe a little bit less traditional, single parents, and I think single parents have a huge added value of collective housing. Anybody who has children knows what a huge job it is to have children, even if you have 2 parents. And if you're by yourself as a single parent, then it would be really nice to be able to share the housework, share chores, share the bills, and everything like that. So my research question was looking at reinterpreting the portique dwelling. So I wasn't looking to transform the dwelling. What I really wanted to do was reinterpret it. And I think the important elements of that is this clarity and repetition in the facade. So there's strong vertical and horizontal elements. And also to use the existing features within the neighborhood as inspiration for the new design. The narrow load-bearing structure really creates cramped spaces. So I think one of the main things to make the housing more flexible is to remove some of the load-bearing walls and replace them with the beams. And also the entranceway is very, very small and cramped. And so to open that up just a little bit will make already a huge difference when you are entering the space. So I just have a couple of short considerations for each of the different target groups. For migrant workers, efficiency versus comfort, this weighing of the two was very important, and also conforming to the standards of this advocacy group, Flexwonen voor arbeidsmigranten. For senior citizens, the most important consideration was to make everything handicap accessible, but also that they have a social network close to home and apartments that still retain their independent living space. And for single parents, we wanted to have a setup where it's easy for them to share their chores, but they can still retain their family autonomy. And also to have it flexible and adaptable to the different stages of childhood development. So now I'm going to talk about my design, and I'm going to start out by talking about the elements that I've changed that are the same for all 3 of the different target groups, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about each individual target group. So the first thing that was changed is the entranceway. To really open it up, I've moved the door only just a half a meter, but you can already see this was the original line of the facade, and you can see how different it is to be standing here versus when the door is just a half a meter farther out. And I also, because I had to change the stairwell anyway, I've put in, instead of a closed concrete stairwell, I've got a wooden stairwell so that the light can come through those stairs and really light up and make it a more open space. I talked about the widening of the spaces, and you can see here that from this really narrow structure, just by taking out a few of the load-bearing walls, all of a sudden you have this really open space with different spaces flowing into each other, that you don't have this strong separation between the different spaces. Of course, you have to also upgrade the efficiency of the dwellings, otherwise they're not comfortable to live in. So I decided to add insulation at the inside, at the front of the facade, and on the outside at the rear of the facade. And the reason I did this was to preserve the characteristic brick facade, and at the rear, where it's maybe a little bit less important to have that characteristic facade, I insulate at the outside. The insulation is then thicker, so you have a higher insulation value, and you also have, and there's less risks involved in insulating on the outside versus on the inside. So because I'm insulating on the outside, you also need to put a new cladding onto the facade. And what I've chosen was is a very-colored slate cladding. And the reason I chose for this is because you've already got 350 millimeters of insulation on the outside, so I wanted to have something that was a thin cladding material. And I also didn't want to have a brick cladding because I didn't want to try and imitate what was already there, but I also didn't want to provide too much of a contrast. So this very colored slate, it still has the sort of natural colors, natural coloring, but it's not trying to imitate what's already there. So now I'm going to talk about the differences between the three different buildings, or three different target groups, and I'm going to look at each of the floor plans and explain kind of what the considerations were for each of these. So the ground floor of the migrant workers we've already seen, which is so it's got a really open floor plan, and but also you've got areas where you have areas for larger groups and areas for smaller groups, areas where you can be sort of so you have different feelings to each of the areas. On the first and second floor, I've divided them into two separate areas. So you have on each side you have a group, you have a cluster of 4 bedrooms, and which all share one bathroom and toilet. At the attic, I've added a dormer to increase the space so that you get some extra bedrooms in the attic. For the senior citizens, I've actually added on a structure to the existing structure, and the reason I did this was in order to preserve the individual apartments. You needed some extra space at the back, and that extra space is then the collective space. Also collective on the ground floor, and when you go up to the upper floor, you've got sort of a guest bedroom, which is more private but a little bit collective because everybody can use it. And in each of the spaces, there's room for a wheelchair to turn in. For the single parents, also I have on the one side I have a really open space, and on the other side there's more closed off spaces. So you have this space to be with all the other people, and you have also more of a private area even within the collective housing. On the first and second floors, where you have the space for the individual families, so that each side corresponds to one family, with this area in the middle being sort of a flexible area. Either it can correspond to one of the two families in case one is larger than the other, or it can be a shared space. With the additions, this at the top is the dormer added to the migrant workers. Here you have the addition of for the senior citizens, and here the addition at the front facade for all three. And I wanted to have them be all in the same family of materials. So you've got a sort of, the rear facade is this vari-colored slate shingles, which I already talked about, and then all the additions have a sort of frame of dark slate tiles, and then oak batten infill. As well as changing the individual dwellings, I thought it was also very important to open up the neighborhood and have a space for people to gather within the neighborhood itself, because the structure of the neighborhood is very north-south oriented with very little variation within the neighborhood. So by demolishing just one portique in a strategic location along this side street, you can really open up the space and also create a relationship with the back gardens, because as it currently is, you've got this really, you've got this strong line here, which everybody has high hedges or fences, so you have no relationship with the garden. But just by opening this up and using this space for the collective housing, you all of a sudden have more of a relationship with the gardens. And by making a pathway in between the back gardens, this is the migrant workers collective, these two back to back, and you can have this be sort of a semi-public area within the neighborhood. This is just an impression of the square. So I was looking at actually the Vogelbuurt as a case study to see whether this type of collective housing would work for portique dwellings. So I wanted to see how that would translate into other portiques. And what I found is that it actually works quite nicely in all these other different types, but there are some limiting factors, and one of them is the size of the portique itself. Because if you have a housing collective, it's considered one house, and if it's bigger than 500 square meters, then it's called a mega woning. And then there's all sorts of much more strict fire regulations, so it's a lot less interesting to do something like this. So for these are all for the migrant workers. So that this one wouldn't work for migrant workers, but actually would work for the senior citizens, because they still retain their autonomous apartments. This 500 square meters is less of an issue. Plus you've got this, you can't see it here, but it's a 4-story portique instead of a 3-story portique, which would make the addition of the lift more efficient. So the idea of the scale between a single-family house and a gallery flat can be both an opportunity and a limiting factor. And the setup with this central access stairwell was a liability for the autonomy of individual apartments originally, but now it's really an asset for the shared housing. And the narrow space is separated by load-bearing walls, and especially that kink in the structure forms a limiting factor in the flexibility of the space. So I've talked about these different dwelling types being for specific target groups, but what they really turned out to be is different types of collective, so different grades of collective housing. So other target groups can go into these different types, depending on the people in any given neighborhood. So for example, you could use the migrant workers housing very easily as student housing. It would be pretty much the same setup. Or for the senior citizens, you could have, instead of having instead of adding a lift, without the lift, it could just be a sort of a co-housing unit, which is already in place. So while not all portiques are suited for all types of collective, they can be reinterpreted for whichever suits the portique and the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saskia. First, I want to give the word to the main mentor.
Yeah, thank you, Saskia. I want to continue with your last notion on the use by the several different collectives. So first of all, I think it's it's a very intelligent idea to use this portique scale for collective housing. One, because there is interest in the market in doing this, because they think what to do with all these different portique flats. And second, because it's you work with a current trend of these migrant workers and the other groups. But seen from this client, from the perspective of a client, could you think of a general design for all different kind of collectives?
Well, I don't think that's. I don't think that would be ideal
for somebody who is renting, who is the owner and wants to rent.
So let me just make sure I know what you're asking. You're questioning whether there should or could be one design rather than three designs, which would apply to everyone.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe you can focus on what is the essential difference between the three.
Okay. So I think one thing is the grade, how collective each of the housing is. So, for example, the senior citizens could be considered sort of the least collective housing. They just have this space at the back, but they still have an autonomous unit with kitchen, bathroom, everything like that. The migrant workers is sort of a second rank in that collective scale, and the single parents would be the most collective. So to try to design one specific design for all the different people, I think would be to ignore the strengths of the collective housing, and that is to be a specific added value for a specific target group.
I think your designs now and the level of collectiveness is highly dependent on your interpretation on what they want, because there could be single parents that think it's enough to have just one shared space, and they like to have a lift, and they could perfectly fit in this senior citizens' house, huh?
Right. Well, I had to make some assumptions when I was doing this, and in fact, you could also, even though I had these specific target groups in mind, it could just be that they have these three designs, and that these are the options for the different collectives who want to who are interested in forming a collective in a portique.
And if you would give a lesson to somebody, owner or another architect who wants to do an application of this idea in another case, what are the core ingredients of your collective designs?
Well, I think when I was talking about the things that my research told about collective, which was that you stack the spaces, so you have the more collective area at the ground floor and the more private areas above, and also the strong separation between public and private, and also to have different types of collective areas within one collective. So you have a sort of an area which is more private for people to use sort of individually, and you have also areas where it's more public that people can come together. And also this group size is also another important consideration.
Okay, can I ask one more?
Yes, you can.
You said that the critique turns into an asset. Well, I think that's wonderful. But then, spatially, how did you work with that? Because what you explained, the only thing you do is to move the door a little bit out. And this is going to be the central part of the...
Yeah. Well, it's not...
So I mean design-wise, what
Yeah.
did you do about that?
Well, I think the asset is already in place. So the asset is this central access area where everybody's coming through, everybody's going up and down the stairs, and you're meeting each other. So and when it's individual apartments, sometimes it's kind of like you're not really interested in meeting your neighbors or whatever. But in this sort of collective, you are interested. That's the whole point. So this central access stairwell is a way to sort of bring people together, and to make that stairwell more of a place where people want to be, rather than a place that's just a place where you need to be to go up and down the stairs. That's where this opening it up comes into play.
So you change the people using the stairs instead of using the critique itself, changing the critique itself.
Well, I think both. But I think the idea of the portique works better with some types of housing than with others.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Guido, do you have questions or remarks?
Of course. Not enough time to ask them all. No, a reflective question. In your conclusions or reflection, you said, okay, it's possible to translate this concept to other boutique dwellings, except for the fact that you look mainly on positive aspects. The question is, what is the weakest part in your strategy or design, way of thinking, and what kind of problems do you have to overcome? Is it strategically, or is it technically, architecturally?
I think there are always going to be challenges on all of those different facets. So strategically speaking, you've got, for example, in the Vogelbuurt, they're privately owned dwellings, so it will be difficult to get an entire portique for this type of housing. The reason I started with the migrant workers, and I started there with this a little bit larger portique, precisely because it was in the hands of one owner, and it turned out to also work very well for the migrant workers. As far as the structure is concerned, I covered that a little bit with this really narrow load-bearing structure, and especially the portiques that were built right after the Second World War have really, like these ones, have really narrow load-bearing structures. If you look at portiques that were built a little bit later, like most of these were built later, you've still got this narrow structure, but it's a little bit less extreme. Other challenges. There's always the challenge of insulating this type of dwelling, because you have to decide whether you're going to insulate it on the inside or on the outside. I'm not sure if this is the direction that you're talking about.
Or you can just interpret my question the way you want it.
Okay.
I'm glad with that's okay. I'm satisfied with that answer. But I want to continue on that, because in your you mainly showed floor plans for the three different types of collective housing. But I think especially the migrant workers housing, but also the housing for single parents, what not only applies to single parents but also about children.
Yeah.
What things do you have to change, or did you change in the design with the infill? So the interior of the boutique flat, the structure. So structurally, you already showed that you have to make some breakthroughs and etc. But what impact do, for example, for the migrant workers have is all those individual, or more or less individual, hotel room-like rooms to the techniques in the buildings? What kind of internal finishes, installation, things like that?
Yeah, well, I think for the installations, my speech was too long, and so I took that out. But basically, there's because I'll go back to this section that I had. Because you've insulated the facade and put on also different windows, you have less infiltration of air coming in, so you need another way of getting fresh air. And so I put a mechanical ventilation system in the basement, and that ventilation system is also heats the air, and that using hot air to heat the spaces rather than underfloor heating or radiators makes it so that you can quickly heat up or cool, and so that they can each regulate it themselves how much they want.
That's specifically for the migrant workers, or that's a comparable system you want to introduce for all the other?
It's a comparable system. This is one of the things that I do for all three of the housing types.
Yeah, well, the question isn't that too much, because you changed the whole, or you really changed everything.
Is it too much as far as too much similar?
No, too much as intervention, where it's so not for the two types of housing compared to each other, but just as a concept, as an installation concept.
Well, too extreme.
Yeah.
You could argue that. I think that you have to put in some kind of system, and you could either put in a ventilation system at the windows or some other kind of ventilation system. I thought most of these dwellings don't have central heating anyway, so you're going to have to put in a new central heating system. So it may be a stronger intervention than is absolutely necessary, but I think that it does help the comfort of the dwellings.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Peter, do you have questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Saskia, for your presentation. Interesting topic that you take. By looking at the portico as a middle skill, a lot of the questions I wrote down you already answered in your presentation and afterwards. They're mostly about flexibility, and you reflect on that also for other target groups who might use the same type of collectiveness. But the only thing you didn't change is the scale. So you're always looking at one portico. You said something about 500 square meters as a barrier. But did you consider looking at taking two porticos, or just a half? What is the scale that you need for a collective?
Well, I think one of my starting points was the scale of the portique, and I think that's why. And I had to make some sort of framework within which that I would work, and that was what I took as that framework. So the one portique rather than two portiques. So I think in that sense, I didn't want to take more than one portique. The other thing is that.
But now you are finished. Can you reflect on it?
I think that you would run into, basically what you would need to do is sort of have sort of a larger collective for the whole neighborhood, which was made up of different portiques, because you're running into this 500 square meter limitation. But if it's per portique is one group, and then you have a connection maybe with other groups within the neighborhood, then that would be something, and that would be something that would be interesting to look into that I didn't have time, but that I would have liked to look into.
Okay. In one way, a portico, as it is now, is already a collective.
Yeah.
They share their staircase and they are in the VPE.
Yeah.
What are the most essential changes that you make to turn this collective into a collective?
Well, I think one of the things that I was talking about in the beginning was the difference between the VVE and the housing cooperation. So this whole idea of having, rather than being individual people with a share who all have to do something about the parts of the building that are shared, you have one organization that owns the building, owns the, or